So in putting a 351 Windsor down in your Fox body Mustang, there's a couple things that you can do. When the 8.2 deck 302 style motor has seen its better days, 351 Windsor is a popular engine swap. This sort of content right here is the stuff that if you can do before you drop the motor in, so you won't have problems down the road having to take things apart like I just did. For a number of years, we've been running the 9.5 deck 351 Windsor style motor. We recently built the 387 stroker here for the black car. We've ran the 408 here in my white car. Both of those builds had a trick flow Windosr intake, which is probably one of the taller intakes that you could actually buy EFI for these cars. And if you take a quick look, there's plenty of clearance for this intake on an 8.2 deck motor. But since we run a 9.5 deck motor in the black car, we have an issue. To get the motor to sit down a little bit further in the engine bay, and this is particularly useful for those who want to run a taller style intake. And there's a couple items that you can put on your car to make the 351 Windsor swap a little bit easier to fit. One of them being a drop set of motor mounts. Also, you could add spacers here. You can see I have a couple spacers in my K-member. I also have these washers. Now we run a pretty tall intake, trick flow Windosr, but one of the major issues, especially those who are running the power steering, the original rack, is the actual oil pan. I didn't necessarily have this problem on my white car when I had the 408 in there, because it had a manual rack. You can see how much room between the oil pan and the actual K-member there is. Having a power steering rack means that you're gonna be limited on this rack. Now we run a manual rack here on my white car, so that doesn't really come into play there because the manual rack's middle bar pretty much is parallel to the K-member bar. But the power steering rack is not, therefore we have to run some bushings. This is the kit I got. I think I got it from Amazon. This is probably one of the things when you're switching to a 351 that like an EFI style, you probably want to go ahead and do this modification while you're at it. And what these are rack bushings. It doesn't look like it's even a difficult thing to install. I mean, all you're really doing is just pulling the bolts out and changing the bushings, right? But we're gonna do that here on the channel. We're gonna do that right now on the video. It's gonna be relevant for those folks that, again, when you get ready to do a 351 swap and you're gonna stick with your power steering unit, this is particularly useful for you to change before you actually do the engine swap, get a little more clearance on that oil pan. Let me bring the car down. I want to show you some of the carnage that I did to my hood. I've actually had an issue with the 351 Windsor with this SVO cowl hood and the clearancing of this intake that we're using. I'll show you what the problem is, and we're gonna try to correct that here today in the video. And maybe you can get a little bit of information out of it if you're planning on swapping your car to 351. And you can see literally my TPS is sitting right on top of my hood. I mean, it clearances a little bit, but we got a 90mm throttle body in there and the trick flow Windosr on our 387 stroker. Man, we gotta get this car washed. So we're gonna try to actually get the motor to sit down a little bit further. A couple years ago, I was racing my buddy finals of a 3-pedal throwdown, and this is what happened to the original hood. Basically broke a TPS sensor. But ever since then, it's had like a little bit of a issue here on the hood that I need to get fixed. We'll probably end up painting the hood eventually soon anyways. The whole car really needs to be painted. That with a couple other chips, we'll get them fixed up. So what these rack bushings will do will allow my engine to come down probably like a ½ an inch. I don't know. I don't even really know, to be honest with you. The bushings are offset for the rack, which is kind of curious if it's actually going to mess up my bumps here too. We also didn't put the spacers in with the Stifler's TKX kit. That's something that I've been wanting to put in too, but I don't want to finalize my exhaust until I get these bushings in, bring the motor down a little bit, and tip it up, because there's a bushing kit that goes in between the mount and the TKX to level it out. And then we're going to finalize our exhaust and do a little bit of welding, because we've been doing the muffler swaps and we want to continue that. Got a cam swap coming up. Got a lot of things coming up for this car as far as content. We're not going to be in a rush doing it, but I figured I'd make this video. I figured somebody would definitely get a little bit of value out of it. I didn't know that the TKX had a spacer kit that went between the mount and the damn transmission. And I've never actually ran these offset rack bushings, and I probably should have. Let's bring the car back up. Let me get some tools out. Let's roll. So at some point in this build, I actually ended up changing these bushings anyways. These are like Prothanes. All you really need to do is take this big bolt down on both sides, and this rack should just come down a little bit. But what we're attempting to do here is to try to give ourselves a little more space in between the oil pan and the rack. And the manual rack actually has like a bar that'll clearance an oil pan. If I wanted to keep power steering, I'm gonna have to actually bring this down. So we're gonna grab a couple wrenches and we're gonna get this stuff off and see what we can do. So let me be clear here real quick for those following that may not understand. 8.2 deck motor is usually referred to as a 302, and the 9.5 deck motor is usually referred to as a 351 Windsor. Now they make other 351 style motors, but we're going to focus on just the Windsor today. Naturally, putting a larger motor in the Fox body, you may run into some fitment issues and some clearancing problems, not only with the exhaust, but with the intake and several other parts. I got the original bolt out for the rack. Now we just have to just got to get the old bushings out to take the whole rack down. But this should give me a little bit of clearance. I don't know how good they are. I guess we'll find out. All right, we got it to move a little bit. Here we go. It's going to be a little bit difficult because take my bump steer down, or at least pop that off. Now on a factory one, you would have a tie rod in, so I'm probably going to have to take this off. That's not too much of a problem. We'll see if we can slip it by. I'm trying to get these bushings out. You see, they just pop right out. These are protheans. These are actually still in really good condition, but you can see how much of a difference this is going to make. Maybe, maybe not. Let's go. Let's just test fit it and see what it looks like once we get the back one out. This one will have to go in the back one. Let me get this popped off here. This is just a spherical, really. We'll pop this joint down. Now that it's not attached to the wheel. I just got to bring it out far enough to get the bushing out. I had to drop my bump steer. I had to take the bolts out. I don't recall, but I don't think the factory had a bolt hole stud like this. So this one might be a little bit easier on a factory K-member. This is for aftermarket. And then we're gonna have to actually take the rag joint apart, which we've just had this apart pretty recently when we were doing the BBK long tube headers. So this shouldn't be too bad, and see if it actually makes a difference with our clearance. For those folks putting a 351 Windsor in their car, probably one of those things you can get in really quick before you actually set the engine in. Everybody's car build may be just a little bit different. Maybe running a different engine build or a different K-member. The information in this video is just meant to be general. Might just help you get the clearance you may need for whatever you're using. Our rack is just literally hitting on the oil pan. When we did take the rag joint off. Anyway, we look at it, we're gonna have to either raise the engine, we're gonna have to loosen up the motor mounts, and we are gonna have to take the spacer plates out. All those really are big, large washers. We've already got the rack loose. We got the bushings ready to go and reinstall. We're gonna have to loosen up the transmission mount because we do have to raise the engine. This is more geared towards the folks that run upper and lower EFI intakes. If you plan on running power steering with the big rack, as drop mounts, K-member spacers, and rack bushings are a staple with doing that sort of a swap. That's what we're here today focusing on. That's what I'm here trying to show you here on the channel. Hopefully somebody gets some good use out of it, maybe some ideas in case they're doing a 351 Windsor swap. Okay, so we're bringing up the engine so we can clear the rack and get these bushings out. It shouldn't be that difficult. Maybe. All right, there's one bushing. You may have to adjust the rack a little bit in the bushing. These should center up pretty easy. So basically all we're doing is just going in reverse here, putting things back together. But we still got to take these motor mounts off and adjust these spacers. So we're gonna take these K-member spacers down that I made with these, and I'm gonna probably take one off. I think that's gonna be enough for the drop. It should be enough to clear my TPS at the top. So we just took one of the spacers out, basically just large washers. And what we're gonna actually end up doing is modifying these washers to have a slot, so I can take them in and out without pulling the motor up so high. Again, this is probably something that I probably should have done before I put the 351 Windsor in, considering the fact that I knew the motor was going to be kind of tall with that intake. Okay, here's a moment of truth. I brought the spacers out, and we're going to go ahead and bring the motor down and see if it's got a little more clearance on the rack, and then we'll finalize those spacers. Okay, we're pretty much right on the rack. Which actually does us pretty good. We may just leave that alone. Considering the motor is pretty level right now, I don't think I want to actually take any of that back apart. That's not really that big of a deal since I can just take the motor mount off and get them out. Not bad. Should have done this a long time ago. Now I get to go back and do it again, you know what I mean? Okay, the moment of truth. You can see where my TPS has been hitting the top of my hood. Looks like we are about 1/8 of an inch or so. When I used to close the hood, it used to protrude up. At least it's not hitting anymore, and I wish I would have went down a little bit more, and I could, if I had a manual rack, I could probably come down another 2 spacers for that matter. It's definitely one of the mods I probably should have done before I put the 9.5 deck motor in. You might even be able to stick your 351 Windsor under a stock hood by messing with those adjustments. So if you guys ended up getting a 351 stuffed underneath of a stock hood with an EFI intake, hit me up in the comments below. Just let me know if you got one under a stock hood anyways, even with a carburetor and maybe an air cleaner. So I'm gonna go through the bolts and put everything kind of back in reverse order. Not really gonna put a whole lot of video into that. Just a really kind of a how-to video. Will it fit? 351 Windsors fit just fine under Fox body. This sort of content right here is the stuff that if you can do before you drop the motor in, stuff that you're gonna wanna do in advance so you won't have problems down the road having to take things apart like I just did. All right, guys, we got everything pretty much set up where we want it. The offset bushings are done. Got the motor mounts set up with the spacers. We even had the time to come back here and put our spacers on our transmission mount, which actually set our driveline angle a little bit better too. One of the last things we're gonna do before we take it off the lift is we're gonna tighten up this exhaust a little bit and do some spot welding. But I just wanted to bring that information to you guys here. Here's just a couple tips and a couple tricks that maybe help you get a little bit more clearance on your ride. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up, give me a comment below, let me know what 351 Windsor you got in your Fox body. We're gonna continue doing content with the black car like this. If you haven't subscribed, consider subscribing to the channel. There's a join button below for the exclusive content for the channel. Appreciate all my members. Outside of that, I just appreciate you guys for watching. We'll do more content like this soon. I'll see you soon in the next one.